Hey everybody, what's going on? It is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a Westworld Season 4 Episode 1 breakdown video, where I'm going to go through the episode in its entirety and give my thoughts, theories, and opinions of this episode as well as other episodes to come. Now for starters, I want to begin with the opening credit scene. And we've had some changes that could potentially hint at what to expect from this season. The first is the fly. Fly has been a symbol of the show since the beginning, but it's never been highlighted like this season. In season 1, the fly would fly on the hosts and they wouldn't notice. Until the first episode of season 1 where Delores killed the fly, hinting that she broke her core code to not do harm. And that to me is the primary symbolism of the fly. For people, when you die, you decay and the flies come. It represents death. But for the hosts, it represents life. You can kill the fly when you go on the journey of your own maze, reaching your own consciousness. Another way that we can look at the fly is a disease transmitter. Delores told the story of her dad Abernathy, who dealt with a bad case of blue tongue, I believe, in his cows. And they were attracting flies, and his only solution was to set the whole barn on fire. And in this case, the flies act like a virus and infect anything at which they come into contact with, which we kind of see later in this episode. Another thing we see from the credit scenes is this is the first time the host actually gets pulled out of the milk bath versus falling into the milk bath, insinuating that this is the rise of the hosts. Some other interesting symmetry is these two hosts imprisoned in a cylinder and they can't reach each other. And then we find out that there are many more and they are all set on fire. And this could insinuate being in a prison of their own sins, something that Abernathy talked about in the first season. Humanity essentially built a meaningless society, and they surrounded themselves with a prison that they didn't know that was there. And this can bring some symbolism like they're in hell. And we know from season 3 that the humans are just as controlled as the hosts. And as it zooms out, it turns into a big sphere. And that could represent many things. It could represent the eye of the fly. It can represent the marble of the hosts, their brain, essentially. The host being trapped by their marble until they go on their own maze of consciousness. Same can be said for humans. What controls them isn't their brains, it's Rehoboam, which has been destroyed. But that's the main thing I gather from this sphere, is it looks different from Rehoboam. There's a part of it you could argue that's organic, and when I think of organic, I think of quantum computing. It's basically an endless supply of data. And if you have quantum computing with unlimited data, then you essentially have every person who ever lived stored away in your databanks. And then they end up exactly like these people in the credit scene. They're stuck in a prison of their own sins. Everything they did in their life, it is now being saved on a computer and can be accessed and taken advantage of anytime. So you never truly die, and that is truly hell. And I think a part of that is foreshadowed here. When we see a skeleton almost put away, and we see a fog come in, almost like they're being put on ice. And I think we'll see this take the form in William, and maybe we'll start to see a cross between humans and hosts. Ford gave William the game of passing through the door, and that's what this could be hinting at. Passing through the door, truly transitioning from a human to a host body, and being put on ice. Being saved and taken advantage of, living forever, but always being in a prison of your own sins. But anyways, moving on from the credit scene, I want to move on to Delores' storyline. And this storyline very much mimicked the first episode of Westworld, where Delores is stuck in her perfect loop. We see her wake up like she did in the previous seasons. And we can see that she retains the same personality as Delores. We see that she paints. We see her attention to detail as she looks at herself in the mirror. She is someone who's conservative and reserved, but longs for something greater. And then we see a weird surprise where Delores' friend asks if she would choose black or white shoes. And she chooses white, which at face value to me symbolizes that this is the Delores that we know, and it is not the Wyatt character or persona that we've seen in previous seasons. This is very much the innocent Delores from season 1. In that same scene, we also have her friend talk about her nightmares. Her friend says that she couldn't sleep, she's had terrible nightmares, and that she should have taken a tablet to help her sleep. And this immediately makes me think of reveries. In season 1 of Westworld, Elsie explained that they use the concept of a dream to justify and explain what has happened to them in other iterations of them being alive. Instead of wiping them completely every single time, they write off their memories as dreams. And that's what this could represent. But then during the conversation, Christina or Delores gets a call from an unknown number. And Delores says that she's been blocking him and this person will not leave her alone. And now I think they're going to deal with the concept a little bit different than the maze. They're going to flip it on its head. What I will say is that this call is externalizing internal emotion. So in this modern future world, it's been put on a phone. But back in Westworld, it was the maze. It was this external thing, this external symbol, the maze, that was calling to them. But really, it wasn't external. It was internal. It was the journey of self-discovery, of discovering yourself and your own consciousness. And that symbol of the maze could be relegated now to a cell phone. Delores had Arnold speaking to her, but to find out it wasn't Arnold's voice at all. It was her own. You could argue that this guy on the phone could be her Arnold voice. But that being said, I think that theory is disproven later in this episode. We see a lot of other signs that this is a park and not real life. When she walks into town, it does have a perfect kind of feeling about it. The lights that are in the town match the tower that we'll see later in the show. We see a group of guys that walk past Delores that catch her attention, saying that he can't believe his friend hasn't been here before, and that it will blow his mind. Kind of like the guests going into Westworld. She also sees a homeless man with drawings of the tower, saying that it's looming over us. Can you see it? And what we see with this is the symbol of the maze has almost been replaced by the symbol of the tower. Akecheta knew the symbol of the maze, so he etched it in people's skulls. He left symbols throughout the park. And people who thought of the maze figured that they were going mad. But they weren't. Kind of like this man. Another thing that I would say that's interesting is I remember when people first started watching Westworld and they talked about the maze. People always thought it was a physical thing, or it was real or tangible. But the maze instead was inside the host's mind. The one thing I'll say about this tower is it is not in any of the city skyline shots in this episode. We've had sprawling shots of the city, but yet not of the tower. It's a very interesting concept. But anyways, Delores makes it to work. And she is a writer, and she tries to make a pitch that is essentially Delores' story. But then Delores' boss comes to talk to her. And this scene directly calls back between a scene between Sizemore and Ford, and the understanding of what the storytelling is in Westworld. Her boss wants sex, violence, danger, transgressions, tragedy, melodrama, all that crap. Because he believes that's what people truly want. But Delores takes pleasure in the little things, the subtleties. She's stuck on a character who just wants something greater. And we'll see that with Ford's touch throughout the show.
It's not about giving the guests what you think they want. And that's simple. Titillation, horror, elation. The guests don't return for the obvious things we do. They come back because of the subtleties. They come back because they discover something they imagine no one had ever noticed before. Something they fall in love with.
And also, during this conversation, Delores' boss mentions that he doesn't want to get rid of her because he knows what she's capable of. Because a couple months ago, she wrote a story about a guy who lost everything. He drowns his sorrows, he stalks some girl, and it ended with everyone dying. Now, obviously, that calls back to this man that we're going to see later in the episode, who is stalking Delores, who obviously is blaming her for his tragic story. But when I read this, it reminds me a lot of William. In this story, we have Delores seemingly writing this guy's story. And he is angry with her because, in his mind, she completely wrote and ruined his life. And that's what happened with William. William went into the park and he met Delores. She changed his whole life and his whole world. When William went on his journey with Delores, she essentially rewrote his life. It changed who he was. He fell in love with Delores, and he realized at the end of it that the love of his life was never even real. So he kept going back to Westworld and stalking her. He started to make her suffer, because when Delores suffered, that's when she was most real. And it ended with everyone dying. William's story ended with the death of his daughter, of his wife, all the hosts that he came into contact with, and we have William's story still left to unravel. And that's the ironic thing of this whole show. This guy is completely suffering, but that is what is necessary to reach your own center of self and consciousness. Suffering to reach the end of the maze, and suffering to walk through the door. In Season 2, Ford made one final story, and that was for William, to find the door. And I think that storyline is still unraveling. Then we have this scene when Delores gets home, and we see the broken vase and the symbol of the maze. Now, in Westworld, the reason why the symbol of the maze was everywhere was because of Akichita. He learned of the maze and made it his mission to spread the symbol throughout the park. In terms of this symbol being here, it could be another character, another host, or it could be Charlotte. Charlotte has essentially become the Judas steer at the top of the tower, watching everything that's happening. And I have a feeling that this Christina or Delores is seeing this maze and going through these interactions for a reason. See what happens, but you could argue that Charlotte may be trying to learn something or get something from the original copy of Delores. But then Delores ends up going on the date, and there's a lot of interesting dialogue here. Delores tells him that she writes non-playable characters. And her date, just like her boss, sees NPC characters as cannon fodder, just for entertainment. But Christina's belief and who Delores was is the exact opposite. Delores was an NPC character, but yet she went on her journey and became something great by pursuing the maze. Delores tells him that real life is depressing and there should be more to it. And that is exactly William's opinion. That is the epitome of the William Man in Black character, and that is what he always says, is nothing is real. And that's juxtaposed by her date saying, maybe you haven't found the right man yet. Interesting. Who would be the right man for her holding the same beliefs? I hate going back to my theory, but it seems more and more true as time goes on. Check out my video, Door to Delores, please. But on her way back, she ends up getting a visit from the man who always called her. This guy tells her that the tower is real, just like she is. And that Delores needs to stop what she's doing and she's destroying his life. And he blames her for losing his job, his wife, everything he held dear. And he's asking her how she wrote them into the game. So we're going to need more episodes to really flesh this out. But in terms of game playing, in Season 1, it was the maze. William kept pursuing the maze, the last game to play, and he found out that game wasn't for him. It was for the hosts. Season 2, Ford made a game specifically for William. And I believe he's still playing that game right now. But now we have another game playing with the tower. And it seems like Delores is writing this story. And I think the reason why this Christina character is so unknowing that she wrote the story is because she already wrote it as Delores. And that's why I find a connection between William and Delores. She wrote William's story without her even realizing it. But she got rescued by Teddy. So he is finally back, and he's probably going to pay her a visit next episode. But moving on to William, we didn't really get much. When he came out of the helicopter thing, he had all of his fingers, which means that this is a host version. If he is a host version, and if we want to believe the end credit scene of Season 3, he is being puppeted by Charlotte. So everything that William is doing is being puppeteered by Charlotte. And what William seems to be doing is he's taking his holding companies and he's buying most of the old city on the outlying areas. My first guess is the old city would be areas in the world that have been desecrated due to Rehoboam being destroyed, people retreating the area, and it being an abandoned city with no desire for people to return. Why would he want these old cities? Probably to build parks, if I were to guess. Places like Delores is in right now. A fake city where they live and operate that's off the grid, that has no demand. And as William walks with the cartel member, they talk about they've upgraded the power to the facility and that the storage units can be powered for 100 years. And with that being said, William says that his plans are more ambitious than most, which to me perfectly insinuates what we've seen. We've seen huge time jumps in the show in the future with a lot of dust and decay. So no wonder they want these storage units to last a very long time. Data is king, and based on the credit scene with William, he is going to be reprinted and reprinted until a true fidelity test has been met. And that could take more than 100 years. I would argue that in this season, we're going to see time jumps that are so far in the future. And one theory I do have is that modern city that we see with Delores, that's not the present. Outside of that city is probably a desert, and it's hundreds and hundreds of years in the future. And this Delores is living in a very small city ecosystem, hundreds of years in the future. And what might shake her out of this is Bernard when he comes back from the Valley Beyond. So that being said, I think the main storyline we have that's in the present is Caleb and Maeve. And really what we see with Maeve is she's going back, reliving her reveries or memories. She said, in this world you can be whoever the hell you want. But the reality is Maeve keeps reliving her past memories, and those have defined who she is. And she keeps falling back to who she was. But during those memories, we see her and Caleb. The city's on fire. We see her and Caleb on a mission, maybe destroying some type of Solomon or Rehoboam or another computer. And we see Caleb injured. We see Maeve touch his face, almost like she cared for him. So there's a whole history here that we do not know. But up to this point, she's in hiding, and that was 7 years ago. But what we know now is Maeve is in hiding, and she's been in hiding for 7 years. And now she's out of hiding because she was attacked by William, who is sending these hosts to kill her. And she learns that William is after something. And he's walking with this man, who I believe is a California representative. But this timeline of Maeve doesn't necessarily match up with Caleb. We know that Maeve's been hiding for 7 years, but we know that Maeve and Caleb have a history after the events of Season 3. But with Caleb, we learn that the riots happened 7 years ago. And essentially, some robots stopped working, which secured Caleb and other construction worker jobs. People kind of fell back into their old habits. Caleb's co-worker believes that Rehoboam never told them who they could be. It told them who they already were. Which is direct contrast to what Westworld is. Ford believes that Westworld guests know who they are. They want to see who they could be. But the biggest surprise is Caleb coming home to his daughter, who is 7 years old. So you're telling me that Caleb led a revolution with Delores, and during the riots of the city, he immediately shacked up with somebody and had a daughter? I don't necessarily buy it. And what are the odds that this daughter looks like she could be Maeve's daughter? And that's why I find this graffiti interesting, because you can take it at face value and say that during the riots, people were angry, and it's showing that the robot controls the human, and the human controls the drone. Kind of this insinuation that we think we're in control, but we're truly not. But this picture could completely summarize Caleb's position. Thinking that he's in control, but there's a puppet behind the strings, pulling his life. And the fact that we know that Caleb is an outlier, and his wife is upset that he seems like he's longing for war. That he has a job, a daughter, a beautiful home, and a patient wife, but he still doesn't feel like he belongs. His wife worries that it's too ordinary for him. Which is ironic, because after Rehoboam's destroyed, he fell into the cookie-cutter life. So more and more with Caleb, I feel like this life that he is leading is fabricated. I think his wife is a host. I think he could have been brainwashed and stuck in this situation without realizing it. And I think that daughter has more of a connection to Maeve and him than it does to his wife and him. But anyways, after he gets attacked, he decides to leave with Maeve. So we will see more unpack with them. But with Maeve and Caleb in particular, some of the timeline doesn't necessarily add up, and there's been history between these characters that have not been explained. But that is all I have to say about this episode. Let me know what you think about this episode down below. What did you think, and where do you think this season is going? I'd love to hear your theories. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.